Good afternoon. The webinar will start now. Welcome to this webinar number 5. And this is the 5th and last webinar of a series of webinars concerning the research methodologies. This webinar will be about the publishing and the review process. First, we would like to thank the sponsors of this webinar, and they are the MAERA and MAERA, meaning the Knowledge Arena on Management, Accounting, Education and Research, the April Association, and also the Space Network. And before moving on and entering on the content of this webinar, first, let me introduce myself. My name is Anabela Mesquita, and my background is in information systems and technologies. I am a professor at the Polytechnic of Porto in Portugal, the editor-in-chief of the International Journal of Technology and Human Interaction, and also the associate editor for the Information Resources Management Journal and the Journal of Cases in Information Technology. Besides that, I am also the president of the Space Network, a network of higher education institutions in the area of the management, hospitality, entrepreneurship, tourism, languages and communication. I have also experience in participating in European projects, both as a partner and as a coordinator. This is the agenda for this webinar. So it will be divided in 2 parts. In the first part, we will talk about the publishing process, how to increase our chances of being published. And in the second part, we will talk about the reviewing process. So let's start talking about the publishing process and how to write and submit a journal paper. Before looking for a journal, we should ask ourselves, do I have a contribution to make? Who is going to be interested in my paper, in the topic of my paper? How does it build on what we already know? How significant is my message? How sure I am about my findings? Anyway, we know that publishing is important for our career, our academic career, and also publication is part of our academic role, both as teachers or students. And we can follow 2 different strategies. We can have a high-risk submission, meaning we want to convert directly a big report or a monograph or a doctorate into a paper or into a paper to be submitted in a conference or to be submitted in a journal. And this means that this big report that has been converted may not be focused on the journal and not formatted for that journal. We are having a high-risk submission because we are not targeting the journal directly. On the other hand, we can also follow a low-risk submission, meaning that we can write a paper for a specific journal. I mean, it will fit the genre, the scope of the journal, it will engage the debate, and also to refer to previous work that has been published in the journal and related publications. So we should be aware that we can follow one of these 2 strategies, and it is better to incur in a low-risk submission and to prepare a paper that really fits the scope and the mission of the journal. And so first we need to find a suitable journal where we can publish and for which we can prepare a paper. So what do we need to know about that journal? We need to know what is the mission, the policy and the objective of the journal, what type of submission is it, Does the journal publish any kind of papers or only certain types of research, meaning empirical research or a review paper or a brief report, a thought piece or a book review? We also need to know if the journal has a good reputation in the field and to know who is the editor and the editorial board of that journal. Moreover, we also need to know what is the acceptance and rejection rate, what is the turnaround time, and if the journal have an international audience. We can also try to find if there is a special issue covering the specific topic we are dealing with, or if we prefer to publish in a regular issue. You have here in this slide an example of an academic journal, the International Journal of Technology and Human Interaction, in which I am the editor-in-chief. In this journal, we can, in the page of the web page of the journal, it is possible to find the mission, the scope, and the types of research that the journal is looking for and will publish. You also have another example, the Journal of Advances in Higher Education, and this journal is published by the Space Network, the network that I referred a few moments ago, and comprising the different types of universities or higher education institutions in the area of entrepreneurship and tourism. And these two are really two different journals. One targeting academics willing to publish in a high-ranked journals, and also already with a lot of experience in preparing papers and submitting papers, and another journal, the Journal of Advances in Higher Education, that is targeting more master and PhD students, and also at some level some graduate students that are willing to have their first experience in the publishing area. And you also have here one example of a special issue also in the International Journal of Technology and Human Interaction. You can see within this big area that is the technology and human interaction, we have here an example of a special issue concerning the advances in human-computer interaction and knowledge-based smart environments. Moreover, you also need to know if the journal is peer-reviewed, who are in the editorial board, if the journal is available online, if the journal is published by an international association, university, or a publishing company. You will also need to know if the journal is indexed or ranked in a database, and in this case, in which database it is ranked. You have here some examples of databases like the Web of Science, the Scopus, the ACM, among others. And of course, they are not all the same and do not have all the same quality. The best ones are the Web of Science and also the Scopus. So the next step, after identifying a journal, you need to be sure that this journal is indexed either to the Web of Knowledge or to the Scopus, or even in both. And for that, we recommend that you go to this site, the site of Thomson Reuters, and look for the list of journals and insert the title of the journal in which you are wishing to publish, and see and confirm if this journal is listed among the journals of the Web of Knowledge. And of course, the same for the Scopus. So you can enter the site of the Elsevier and look and confirm if the journal is listed also among the journals that are being indexed by Scopus. And then comes the work of preparing your paper. And the first homework is what you can see here in this slide. First, read the journal's aim and scope. You need to know what the journal is about, what is its aim, what is its scope. Look also to past issues of the journal. Try to be aware and comfortable with the kind of things and topics and research designs that are published in that journal. Look at the best papers and see how they have been constructed and try to do the same. And if you have any doubts, you may wish to discuss your paper with the journal editor. Sometimes me as editor, I receive papers that do not fit within the scope or the mission of the journal, and I have to reject them even before sending them for review. So the advice I can give you all is to look for an adequate journal. And there are some publishing houses that have big collections of the journals with different topics in different areas. You have here one example of the IGI Global. They have dozens of journals covering all sorts of areas in the information management resources, but also to technology and other areas related with information management and technologies. So you may try to take a look at the collection in order to find the most suitable journal where you can publish. And then what can you do in order to prepare your manuscript? First, read the manuscript submission guidelines. Make an effort to improve the quality of your manuscripts before submission. Try to be as objective as possible about your work. So in each page of each journal, you can see the mission, the aims, the scope, and even to see the guidelines or templates that can be used in order to prepare your paper. Let's see in detail some aspects of the paper. Let's start with the paper title. The title of any paper should be concise, accurate, and informative, because you know the titles are often used by the Google search engines. The title should be specific and it should contain words that readers might be searching for. And if this is the case, the impact of the title may be strong and attractive. The title will make it more likely people to find and want to read your article. It must reflect the content of your article, otherwise the readers will be confused and disappointed. It must also be comprehensible to the general reader outside your field, and it should not bear any types of abbreviations, as not all the readers might be comfortable with the area in which you are publishing. In this slide, I show you an example of a title that conveys the necessary information for the reader. Let's see the first one. You have here, improving decision-making in extreme situations, the case of a military decision support system. So in this title, you have the information about the methodology that was used in this research, meaning it is a case study. Then you have the topics that will be discussed, the dependent and independent variable, and finally, the context where this research took place. Also, in the second example, you have the same kind of information. So you have the methodology, that is the case study. You also have the dependent and the independent variables, and the context, that is the developing countries, and specifically the case of the Jordan country. So try to follow this kind of advices, using this kind of strategy, because this will improve the possibility of being published. Then comes the abstract. The abstract is what readers and reviewers and editors will use when they are deciding whether to read through your article or not. So this is the first thing that we as editors and reviewers read. And after reading the abstract, we already have an idea if we should move on and read the rest of the paper or if we should reject it. So you should spend some time making sure that it is readable and that it contains a complete description of your work. So it must be accurate as a reflection of what is in your article. It must be self-contained without abbreviations. It needs to make sure that you check the journal author's guidelines to see what length of abstract is required. See if there are specific guidelines such as word count, subject matter, method of submission, as well as qualifications and letters of recommendations that journal might require, the selling points of your paper, if your abstract reads well, and if it is also well structured. And here in this slide, you have an example of an abstract and the structure of the abstract with the different parts of it. So starting the abstract, you should explain what is the purpose of your research. Why are you willing to carry on this research? So state what is the purpose. You can also identify the context and the gap. And the context and the gap helps to identify the purpose of your paper. Then comes the methodology. So what kind of methodology did you use in order to reach the purpose of your research? On the third place, you have the findings. What were the findings that you discover using the methodology you implemented? And finally, the relevance and contribution of your research. Why was it relevant to do that research? And what is your contribution to the development of science? Do not forget that your personal purposes or objectives are not relevant for an academic research. What is relevant is the impact or the contribution for the science generally speaking. You also need to pay attention to the writing. So the language should be clear and also to an acceptable standard. If you are not sure about the language that you are using, you should ask a colleague to read through your final draft, in particular if you are not an English speaker. Be aware that the reviewers are not expected to correct or copy edit any manuscript. So if you are not an English native speaker, there are some services online that can help you in this process. I have two examples here. The Emerald provides a service for any articles that might need copy editing, and also the Society for Editors and Proofreaders also offer this kind of services according to some rates. And do not forget that copy editing editors will be editing primarily the quality of the language of the paper and will not necessarily advise you on the quality of the content. So my suggestion or my advice is that you try to prepare an error-free manuscript that is ready to be submitted to any kind of journal, also to convey your research ideas and results clearly and effectively, because this will increase the acceptance, the chance of acceptance of your paper. Also bear in mind that some journals have a style associated with it. So before submitting your paper, look for the guidelines or for the templates if available. And the template might comprise the structure of the paper, but in particular the kind of lettering you should be using, the spacing, the headings for the titles, subtitles, and so on, but also bibliography, in which style you should present it. And one of the most annoying things for an editor is when we receive some papers that were submitted to the journal and we need to ask the authors to revise the paper and to put the paper according to the guidelines of the journal before sending it or even considering it to be submitted and sent for the reviewers. So look for the guidelines, look for the template, and try to follow the guidelines and templates. Try to follow them before submitting your work. Then comes the keywords, and the keywords are essential because it will help that your article to be found online quickly and accurately, ideally within the top 5 hits. So the key to this is the appropriate use of keywords. This will help to increase the chances of the article being located and therefore cited, because this is the most important aim that you want, is to be found and to be cited. And recent evidence suggests a strong correlation exists between online hits and subsequent citation for journal articles. So after submitting an article, it is okay to stay in touch with the journal editor. Most journals allow to log in to the system to check on the progress of the review process. And if you see that your paper is stuck for some weeks at any stage, don't be afraid to send a polite and respectful inquiry, asking if there is anything you can do to help it to go along. Or if you are in a time crunch because you are looking to make a job change or are being considered for a promotion, it is also okay to kindly mention this in your note. So this means that you can be in contact with the editor and ask him to see if he can help you to move, to see what's happening with your paper and try to move it faster in the reviewing process. Let's see now other issues that are also important in the papers. Let's consider first the literature review. Sometimes not well, or let's say forgotten parts of the paper, or not so in evidence. The literature review shows what is already available in your area of interest. And it is an integral part of the entire research process and makes valuable contribution to every operational step. Of course, we know it can be time-consuming, daunting, and frustrating, but of course it is also rewarding. And here you have the functions of literature review. It can bring clarity and focus to your research problem. It can help you to improve your methodology. It can broaden your knowledge. And of course, it contextualizes your findings. It will also help you to show what has already been said about a topic. And here you have the 5 steps that you can follow in order to prepare a good and strong literature review that will go in your paper. So first, frame the questions for the review. Why are you doing this literature review? What were the keywords that you used in order to retrieve the papers, the monographs that you read in order to prepare your literature review? And which databases, search engines did you use to find relevant work? And what was the keywords and strings used to retrieve this kind of information? And how did you assess the quality of the studies retrieved? Or did you use all the results that you got? How did you summarize the evidence? And finally, how did you interpret the findings? So if you explain all of this in your literature review, you are doing a good job. And me as editor, what I find is that a common mistake is wanting to publish papers in areas without ever referring to previous papers in that area. So how can you publish a paper in one area if you did not do your homework and try to see what kind of topics and researchers and authors are also researching in that area? This is crucial because your contribution, your research will be built on what has already been done. And this must be present in the paper. If this is not, of course, you will not have points or enough points in this literature review in order to be accepted. Another important aspect is the research method. So if your paper covers empirical research, meaning survey, desk-based research, and so on, it is necessary to tell the reader something about the methods used in this research. At least give enough information for the reader to have a sense of whether he can trust you. It is needed to prove that theoretical framework and literature review clearly influence any empirical study that has been reported. So what you have here in this structure, in this image, is that first you have your research questions that can be evident or shown in your introduction together with the context. Then in the literature review, you create your research framework. So everything is there, all the research that has already been done or carried out by other authors. You also know very well your variables under study, and of course you can propose a research framework that afterwards will be used in your empirical research. So, and in your research method, in your methodology, you should show that everything in your paper is connected. There is a link between the different parts. In the research method, you also need to justify, for instance, the research method. Why did you use a case study, for instance, or a survey, or some other kind of methods? You need to be aware that this research method needs to be linked with the research question. And the justification of this choice is related to the kind of research question you proposed on the first place. You also need to justify the sample size and clarify how the stratified random sampling methods was implemented, if the case, how the survey instrument was developed, validated, and administered, how the interview script was created, and what are the hypotheses, if any. If you are using qualitative research, you know that you will use words rather than numbers to describe findings. You will emphasize seeing the world from the perspective of the participants. The goal is to understand a context in a holistic way rather than predicting, emphasizing the subjective dimension of human experience. It is a holistic rather than reductionist approach and is associated with the interpretative approach, which is discovery-oriented, explanatory, descriptive, and inductive in nature. I will not go deeper in this, the qualitative and quantitative, as these were topics discussed in previous webinars. Another important part of the paper is the conclusion. So here in the conclusion, the reader can see the research contributions and the implications of for the research. Also the implications for practice. Why is this important for management field or for entrepreneurship field? the research limitations, and also the future research directions. And here you have some examples about the way you can present the limitations of your study. You can say clearly that your study has some limitations. First in this area, second in that area, and third in that area. It is correct to present and to be aware of the limitations of your study. When you present the limitations of what you have done, you are criticizing your research. You are putting some distance between you and your research, and you are looking to what you have done and recognizing that this could be improved, or if there are, and that has some limitations. And of course, these kind of limitations will point you directions for future research. So this is truly important. And as I said, limitations can point future research directions. And here you also have examples of the sentences that you can use in order to introduce those future research directions. For instance, the results of this study suggest that this and that, and because of that, we suggest that in the future, we will need more research about this, about that, and so on. Okay, then you will be the record of these webinars will be available, and you can see more detail and at your own pace the examples, both for the limitation and also for the future research directions. Of course, the papers usually present some problems that are related mostly with the research process. And what kind of problems are we talking about? Papers or research processes have too many focus, and when it has too many focus means that in a certain way the author gets lost among all the issues and topics and objectives he wants to attain. So my advice is that it's better to focus in one or two issues, concentrate on that, and improve the quality of what you are doing. Another problem is related with a poor literature review. This is so important. Literature review is so important because it will make sure that you are dealing with the right problem, with the right gap that no one else have ever tried to solve, and that you are following the right direction using the right methodology, because you know very well what has already been done in that area. If this literature review is poor, meaning you are building a house without the necessary pillars in order the house to be stable and strong and resist time. Another problem is related with the database and sampling subjects. If you want to do a survey and use only 10 respondents, this is not meaningful. So there is some kind, you are showing that you do not know how to prepare a sample and what is the minimum number of persons to be interviewed or to answer a questionnaire. So this is also a problem. Or it might be that your research question is poor or unresearchable, or that you have not defined clearly your research problems. Also, you might have some project management problems, or you have a weak conclusion that has nothing to do with the findings that you got before, or even you may have some outdated references, which of course is also a problem. And be aware that the good research does not publish itself. So the fact that you have done good research does not mean that your paper will be immediately published. Your paper, as well as research, need to have very good quality. And here you have some tips for increasing your impact. So I recommend that you become actively involved in academic conferences, choose an attractive title for your paper, get to be known in your community, improve your web presence, make sure that relevant terms are included in the abstract, or if you want, publish with an author with already an high H index, review papers for conferences and journals. This is extremely important because by reading and reviewing the work of your peers will help you to understand better what kind of mistakes you are making, and this will help you to improve the way you present and write papers. Target also journals in rapidly growing research fields. Use blogs to leverage ongoing researcher discussion and write a review article. I will now move to the second part of this webinar and talk briefly about the peer reviewing process. What is a peer review? You have here some keywords. I highlighted some keywords about peer review. So peer review is the examination of manuscripts by other people. It is the scrutiny of the other experts in the same field to check the validity and evaluate the suitability of your publication. It is a process whereby scientific experts evaluate the manuscript and provide feedback. So you already have here some keywords: examination, scrutiny, feedback, and recommendations. So these are important words in this process. And why is it important to get involved in the peer review? You know, the peer reviewing is one important phase of the publication process. So you know that good journals offer or only publish papers that were peer reviewed and were accepted by the associate editors, because this means the paper has good quality. So this is a phase of the publication process. Also, peer reviewing assures the research quality. If you know that a paper that is published was already reviewed by 3 or 4 persons, you think that that paper has more quality than one paper that was published immediately without being reviewed by other people. This is also a process where you help other researchers. So we help each other. We belong to an academic and scientific community that is helping each other to improve the quality of research and quality of the results of research. Moreover, you stay abreast of the latest research trends in your area. So you know exactly what the others are doing just because you are reviewing their papers. And this also makes you to belong to a scientific community. In this slide, you can see graphically the reviewing process. I'm going to talk about this in the next slides in more detail, but here you can see graphically the whole process. So first, the author submits a manuscript that is first read by the editor-in-chief. So this is a desk review, and this editor might reject immediately the paper because it does not fit within the scope or the mission of the journal, or it has not enough quality, or because the editor feels that even if the paper goes through 2 or 3 rounds of reviews, it will not have enough quality to be published. So it's not going to send the paper to the reviewers, because this means wasting the time, the valuable time of the reviewers. Or you may say, okay, this paper has enough quality, and so it sends the paper to the reviewers. At least 2 reviewers, usually in the journal in which I am the editor-in-chief, I try to use 3 or 4 reviewers. So it is sent to the reviewers that will assess and evaluate and give comments and recommendations. about the paper, and this will send to an associate editor, so a senior editor, that will also read the paper, analyze the comments made by the reviewers, and make a decision. This decision can be reject the paper, or it can say, no, I need the author to revise the paper. It can be major revisions or minor revisions, and the paper is sent to the author that revises the manuscript, that sends back the manuscript and the enhanced manuscript, and this will go on one more cycle or two more cycles, and finally the paper can be accepted, or if not, it will be rejected. So here you have some more detail about each phase of the reviewing process. So the first, we have the editor's decision. Should I send this paper for review, or should I reject it immediately? As I said, this decision is to prevent editors wasting the time of the reviewers. And the screening criteria includes if the paper fits the mission of the journal, if it is the significance of the research, and likelihood of moving forward acceptance in 2 rounds of reviews. So as I said, the work is sent out to at least 2 reviewers, and the reviewers can say that the paper needs major revisions, minor revisions, or be rejected, and the same happens with the associate editor. The authors resubmit the paper, an enhanced version of their paper. They respond point to point to each suggestion and comment made by each reviewer. He updates the manuscript. He takes into consideration the deadlines, and also something very important is the attitude. Let me talk briefly about this. There are some authors that get very upset when they receive some comments and suggestions made by the reviewers. We as editors and reviewers like to see that the authors accept, or at least try to consider, the comments and suggestions made by us. And this is very important. Of course, we as reviewers and editors might not have completely understood the aim of the paper, but this means, if we didn't understand, this means that the authors were not able to convey clearly their message. So this attitude, the attitude of being open and being willing to cope with the comments and suggestions made, it's really important in order to progress and increasing the chances of being accepted. So try to be open and try to put yourself in the shoes of reviewers and editors, and try to see why they are making those comments before being mad or upset by those comments. What are the benefits of doing reviews? By doing that, the author knows that their work will be scrutinized, and it will raise and increase the standard before the publication is sent to the journal or conference. It will also add some additional weight to the claims that challenge our current understanding. It will improve the quality control of the work of every author, and every author will have some feedback about the quality of its paper, about the quality of the research, about quality of the findings and conclusions, which is, I feel, extremely valuable for me as a researcher. Of course, there are also some ethical issues that need to be taken into consideration. The first one concerns plagiarism. Of course, we do not think that all authors will commit plagiarism, but it may happen. So if you are not sure that you cited all authors in your literature review, in your research, please use anti-plagiarism software just to make sure you are not just copy the work done by other authors without quoting and citing their work. Also be aware that there might be some conflicts of interest, and be sure that you are not breaking confidentiality when you are presenting, for instance, case studies. Just before finishing, some guidelines. You are doing a review, please do not forget that you are an author too. So try to be professional and constructive when providing feedback to the authors of the papers you are reading. So provide constructive and detailed feedback, be polite, do a thorough work, keep to the deadlines. This is extremely important. Don't forget that now it's your turn to review the work of others, but when you submit a paper, you also, like the others, to comply with deadlines for your paper. So always try to put yourself in the shoes of the other person. How do you do a review of a paper? Start by doing a first reading of the paper and ask yourself, is it clear? Are you able to resume the paper in your own words? What is it about? What was done? How is it done? Which are the results? Read again, second time. Take care of the details. Think about structure. Is there missing something in the structure? How could it be improved? Does each subsection is adequate? The references are relevant and up to date. The tables and figures and respective descriptions are clear and pertinent. And finally, read it one last time to see if something is missing. Do not forget to identify the strengths of the paper. Is the paper relevant for your field? Is it dealing with a topic that is really new in your field? If so, just mention that. Say clearly, this is a strength in the paper. Is the structure clear? Okay. If okay, say this is also a strength. Try to motivate and encourage the author to carry on the research, and even if the paper is rejected, motivate the author not to give up, but to carry on and improve and enhance his work. Be supportive and constructive, and provide concrete suggestions for improvements. Don't forget that reviewing is a learning process, also for you as a reviewer. This is extremely important. You have here in this slide an example of a template that is used for review. This is just one example, and there are several other examples in the internet, and each publishing house uses its own template. But here you can see we have evaluation criteria, so different topics that we should analyze in each paper, and we need to grade it between 1 and 10 points. In this example, you have the popularity of the subject, if it is adequate or not for the journal, so meaning the mission and the aim of the journal, the adequacy of literature review, the quality of research design, the adequacy of data analysis, the contribution to the literature, legitimacy of conclusions, the practical and managerial significance, and clarity of presentation. And then you, as a reviewer, needs to propose some decisions. So you can say that this is an outstanding paper, that is definitely publishable, probably publishable, marginally publishable, and not publishable at all. And then recommendations for review and your editorial decision. You have a section that is called comments to the authors, and this is in relation to the criteria that you used before, meaning the criteria that is on the first part of the slide. So if you graded some criteria with a 7, 8, 9, or 10, you need to justify why you graded it 7, 9, 8, or 10. And if you graded some criteria with 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5, you also need to justify your decisions. And meaning that if you graded it less than 5, of course, you can also have some recommendations for improvement. Okay, so don't forget that everything is connected, and include all recommendations and suggestions that you can think that will improve the quality of the paper. In this slide and in the next one, I will leave some useful links that you might explore afterwards. And here are some references that were used to prepare this webinar. And finally, I'm available to answer to your questions, if any. I will share now the video, and I'm available to answer your questions. Are there any questions? Of course, the link to the webinar will be sent you afterwards. And so you can see in more detail some aspects that could have not been so clear in this presentation. And finally, I would like to ask you something. We are preparing future webinars and even other kinds of activities that will be for you as an audience. We are willing to prepare short courses concerning specific aspects of the research methodology, and for that we will send all participants in all webinars a message asking you to identify your needs and gaps so we can address those needs and gaps. We ask you to reply to that message because this will help us to improve our service. And of course, we thank you for your support. So at this moment, I see that are no questions. I also thank you very much for your participation in this webinar. I hope it was useful for everyone. And please be aware that you will receive this message. And I really thank you in advance for all your contributions and suggestions and comments so we can improve our service to all of you. So thank you very much.